Welcome back. As we mentioned, President Trump is spending the night in China after the first day of his summit with President Xi Jinping. The leaders met for more than 2 hours, discussing a number of topics, including trade, the war with Iran, and Taiwan. Joining me now is the chair of the House Select Committee on China, Republican Congressman John Moolenaar of Michigan. Congressman Moolenaar, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
I want to start off by getting your impression so far of the president's trip to China. We have seen the two leaders meet. President Trump has had a lot of public praise for the visit so far. Do you think the U.S. president should see President Xi as an adversary or an ally?
Well, I think the president has taken the right tone where he's being very respectful, gracious. He's receiving a warm welcome. And it's important to set that context because there are some very difficult issues that need to be resolved. And so I think it's been a very important meeting, and they are going to have future meetings as well. But my goal here would be to say that, it's friendly, but at the same time, we have challenging issues that need to be resolved.
Let's talk about one of them, Taiwan. You're, of course, a very strong advocate for strengthening Taiwan's ability to defend itself against China. I want to read you a part of this statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. This was after the meeting between President Trump and President Xi, in which President Xi apparently warned President Trump that mishandling Taiwan would cause, quote, clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. What was your reaction to reading that, Congressman?
Well, it's very clear we have different views on Taiwan. We have the Taiwan Relations Act that governs our actions towards Taiwan, which basically says we will support the defense of Taiwan. We want to see peace across the Taiwan Strait and the status quo, and we recognize the value of having a free, democratic island of Taiwan that has contributed so much to the world's prosperity, and we are committed to its defense. President Trump, more than any other president, has supplied military capabilities to Taiwan, $11 billion in munitions just in the past since December. And so Xi Jinping views it very differently. He has told his military to be prepared to take Taiwan by force if necessary. But he's moving the goalpost because the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has never governed Taiwan, and it's simply aspirational on his part to try and somehow take Taiwan by force if necessary.
What do you make of the fact that the United States did not include a mention of Taiwan in its official readout? Should the president have drawn a very firm line with President Xi? And of course, we weren't in that conversation. But would that have been your expectation?
No, President Trump focused on what the American people are thinking about, making sure that China fulfills its responsibilities of buying American farm produce and products, making sure that the critical minerals supply chain is there, making sure that American workers are treated fairly. And one of the other things that President Trump has been very strong on is the area of fentanyl and China's role in the fentanyl poisoning of American citizens. And he has pushed back on that and is going to continue to build on those successes of previous meetings.
Congressman, do you worry, though, without publicly pushing back against that warning from President Xi Jinping, which has now been all over the headlines, that the United States is allowing China to take a position of strength and to project strength on this issue of Taiwan?
Well, we have to note that it was China's, the readout that they put out there. And the Chinese Communist Party is very public relations, always trying to manipulate the message. Of course, their people don't get to hear the truth. They don't have a free press. And the CCP is always trying to influence Taiwan, scare the Taiwanese people, threaten, do gray zone activities. And so this is simply one more case. Secretary Rubio was very clear that the policy of the United States toward Taiwan has not changed. We are governed by the Taiwan Relations Act and the 7 principles that come through that. And so I think it was very clear without provoking some kind of a major confrontation.
Let me ask you about some of this new reporting we have here at NBC News, which has learned from 2 sources familiar with the matter that Chinese state-controlled companies have, in fact, discussed a plan to sell weapons to Iran. Now, President Trump says President Xi told him that he would not give military equipment to Iran. But what do you make of that reporting? Does it concern you?
It does concern me, and we've seen how China has enabled Russia's war against Ukraine. We know that China supplies parts, dual-use capability parts that can be used for military applications to Russia as well as to Iran. We know that China enabled Iran to access satellite imagery that helped target different U.S. facilities and interests. So we know that China, while they maintain publicly that they're very neutral in these areas and trying to be a peacemaker, they are actually fomenting this kind of discord. They're also buying 90% of Iran's oil and much of the energy from Russia. So they're financially enabling these bad actors as well.
Let me ask you on Iran. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Iran's blocking of the Strait of Hormuz was raised with China, but that the U.S. did not ask specifically for China's help. Secretary Rubio said it's not needed. Of course, as you know, Congressman, gas prices continue to go up here in the U.S. Yeah. Do you believe that there is a role for China to play in reopening the strait? Do you want President Trump to press China on that point?
Well, clearly it was discussed. We aren't in a position of asking China to do something on this because ultimately it's in their best interest to do something. They receive close to half of their energy through the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf region. That's something that is in their interest. They're currently, using their stored resources, but eventually there's going to be pressure and pain on their economy. And so it's in their interest. They should be responsible partners in this effort to keep the rule of law and the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz.
And Congressman, finally, I do want to get your reaction to something that President Trump said before he departed for China. This was earlier this week when he was asked about negotiations and how the U.S. economy factored into his thinking. Take a listen to what he had to say.
When you're negotiating with Iran, Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all.
Do you think it was a mistake for President Trump to say that, to send that message?
I think the message he was sending is how committed he is to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. I think President Trump every day wakes up thinking, what can he do to help the American people? That's why we did the working families tax cut that put more money in Americans' pockets. And we're going to continue to see gas prices come down as this conflict is resolved. But at the end of the day, a nuclear Iran or an Iran that's able to reach our shores with ballistic missiles that carry nuclear warheads, fomenting terrorism around the world is not in our best interest, and it threatens our current generations as well as future generations. So when he says the economy wasn't the factor in his negotiations on a given day, he's committed long-term to help strengthening the American economy and has done that and demonstrated that throughout his presidency.
All right, Congressman John Moolenaar, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.